King Tower activations have been an integral part of the Clash Royale gameplay since the game existed. Most commonly, it comes from losing one of your towers, which would get the King Tower to substitute for it, but getting your king damaged would also activate him, which would cause you to gain a third tower for the rest of the match. Now, why is this important? Generally speaking, a third tower defending will always result in more DPS, which basically acts as a disadvantage to your opponent every time they attack, which is why spelling the enemy king is the white flag of the Clash universe. For example, sometimes this king tower can actually change some interactions drastically. What's interesting is not all decks benefit the same from the king tower activations. For example, cycle decks tend to get more value from it due to their nature, as they are more defensive focused and try to avoid all damage. Besides, buildings and all the kiting they do allows them to keep the enemy win condition in range of the king tower for longer. But for beatdown, they have a fine line between completely ignoring, let's say, a miner and soaking all the damage from it for an elixir lead, or being forced to defend it and having to play an expensive card to stop that miner. A king tower in that situation wouldn't help save elixir for them, so it's less valuable. Whereas as a cycle player, stopping the miner with no damage is usually done by an ice spirit and skeletons, as skeletons alone are not enough for a perfect defense. But with the king tower up, it becomes possible, which means this activation saved you 1 elixir on this interaction. Imagine having 10 interactions like this throughout the game and how game changing it is when they add up. And besides your own deck, the opponent's deck also changes how valuable the king activation is. Going against Expo means activating your king tower is useless because the only card that can get in range of it is the knight. And honestly, if their knight is what took down your tower, I think it's time to quit the game and play something more fitting for you. But against Graveyard, majority of the time, a king tower activation means that you just won the game and there is almost no hope for them to continue playing. King activations can be achieved by some easy methods like Electro Spirit or getting a Firecracker shot to go in an angle. Some other times it can be some creative methods like transforming the enemy's Mega Knight into a frog and having him land on the king tower at the end, or the Fisherman, which could be slightly harder but reliable enough, or even having the enemy monk deflect the subscribe button that you should definitely press. However, I'm mostly gonna be talking about the most unique, flexible and difficult one, being the tornado. Quick disclaimer, when I'm showing an activation like this one, you have to defend whatever the hell is going on here. Or there, I don't know, it's just common sense, dude. Don't jump into the comments and complain about all the damage. Most common Nado activation is the Hog Rider. Besides being a +1 trait on defense, you also take no damage and get your king tower up. And since the Hog is tanky enough, it works regardless of what tower troop you are playing. This activation allows you to counter a naked Hog by just pulling it in range of all 3 towers. Hog players adapted to this by playing an Ice Golem in a way that would put him between the Hog and your king tower to act as a body block. They might fail and end up having the Hog be closer to the king, so it remains possible to pull him, or have this happen, which would kill the point of the Ice Golem entirely. But a very good player might also be able to nudge the Hog slightly with a Spirit Jump animation, so watch out from this. Next is Balloon, and usually it gets played on the side, kinda like the Hog Rider, and when it's played there, you need to wait for it to hit first before trying to pull it to the king tower. If you don't do that, it will not work and the balloon won't be pulled close enough and will return back to annihilate your tower. Cannoneer is interesting as the high damage kills the balloon before it gets on king tower. Death damage does the trick, but the issue is it will hit your tower as well. But I found out that with an Ice Spirit you can activate your king tower without taking a balloon hit on your tower, since the balloon dies before going back to the tower. Now if the balloon is placed on the bridge for whatever reason, you can use an Ice Spirit to pull it while frozen. This allows you to activate the king tower while taking no damage on your tower, but most people don't play the balloon there. With Cannoneer, sometimes you might take the death damage bomb on your tower because it kills the balloon very quick, but with the right timing, you can get it to only damage the king tower. It's just a slightly more tight window. Suspicious Bush is, well, suspicious because on this side, the tower hits the goblin closer to the king, so the timing is slightly harder to get right. But because of True Blue, True Red, on the other tower, it targets the goblin that's far away from the king, so the activation becomes easier to do, pulling both goblins doesn't really work, as they would be in each other's way, which would make them get stuck on tower. Cannoneer and Duchess deal way higher damage in a smaller period of time, so they would kill the goblins before you can pull them to the king tower. Skeleton barrel activation has less strict timing than the other activations, but the issue is the worse you perform it, the more damage you get on your tower. You could get your tower kinda heavily damaged if you suck at positioning and timing your NATO, but if you get it right, it can end up being a flawless activation, so try to practice it a bit before using it in a real match. Cannoneer and Duchess would normally pop that thing very quickly, making an activation not possible. Unless there is something tanking for it, then you can probably go for it safely. Evo Mortar is the only building that can activate King because of the goblin it shoots. The timing is very hard with Princess Tower. You need to make sure only one damage tick from the NATO applies. Duchess kills the goblin quick, making it impossible to do, and Cannoneer one-taps the poor thing. Against Goblin Barrel, there is multiple different goblin positions you need to worry about, or so I thought until I discovered this NATO position, which covers every single barrel position. As long as the barrel is touching the tower and isn't played like a tile away from it, it should work. Even the safe goblin barrel spot that people think is safe actually gets you a king tower activation. The same NATO position works on Cannoneer and Dagger Duchess without any issues. Almost, as the timing window becomes slightly smaller since this tower kills the goblins quicker. So in some cases, the goblins might end up dead before they can hit the king tower. For Evolved Barrel, the dolls have the HP of skeletons, so they die to 1 tick of NATO damage. But if they are placed closer to the king, you could play your NATO early so the damage ticks are wasted and the pull isn't. But it's very hard to pull off. It doesn't work if the barrel is a bit far from the king tower, so I would recommend to never go for it. The exact same NATO position works on every goblin drill position as well. No matter where the drill is played, this would still pull the goblins on the king tower. Even this far drill position will still get you a king tower activation without breaking a sweat. This also works with Dagger Duchess exactly like it does with Princess Tower. If you're using Cannoneer though, it becomes a bit more time sensitive, as sometimes it works as you see here, and other times it doesn't work, as the second Cannoneer would kill the goblin before it hits. When it comes to Evo Drill, Princess Tower uses the same positions of the normal drill, and Cannoneer uses the same positions of a normal drill as well. But since Dagger Duchess has faster initial burst damage, she takes 33% of the drill HP, so it submerges and makes the goblins die quicker, thus ruining the king activations. If the Evo Drill was placed down, then the goblins would be close enough to damage the king tower before they die. Aside from that, maybe you can wait for the second or third drill cycle to activate the king if you have Duchess, if you want a safer approach. Miner has a similar approach to Goblin Drill and Goblin Barrel when it comes to positioning. Majority of the miner positions can be pulled by this NATO placement, and even with other towers it works fine as Bro is tanky enough. When the miner is placed around the outer side, you might have to change your NATO position a bit, but as long as he isn't placed on the safe spot, it would be possible to NATO him on the king tower. Royal Hogs are almost a free king tower activation because there is a lot of them and they push each other closer to the king. The game you're supposed to play here is more of how do I take the least amount of damage while doing this? The ideal scenario is you pull 3 of them to the king tower, since all 4 of them is quite literally impossible to do. And when split, they usually deal less damage and become easier to pull. Even a 3-1 split is much better than all 4 on the same side, so keep that in mind. Other tower troops don't change much about what you have to do, but they take less damage because of their higher damage. Like in a split situation, you can literally get away with taking only 1 nibble while using the Cannoneer. Just chill. Nothing to worry about. If you got Duchess on Cannoneer, they are better in this situation. Even when placed on the bridge, Ram Rider doesn't get pulled because despite being similar to the Hogs, she is much heavier. You could pull it with a building than NATO, but she might die before getting to the king tower, so watch out from that. But besides that, if she was played 1 tile to the left of the bridge or more, she becomes possible to pull since she is closer to the king. Her HP is also high enough to allow this to be possible even when you're running Cannoneer. Now believe it or not, an activation against Graveyard is possible. Just like Evo Barrel, you need the damage ticks to be wasted and have the skeleton be pulled a bit towards the king. But I kid you not, pulling this off is more like winning the lottery, so I personally think you should never go for this and only hope it happens by accident. Big beefy giant boys are heavy to pull by themselves. They are even heavy to successfully pull with an ice spirit. Most of them would just require you to pull them by a building and then nado them from there. Although some of them kinda die before then, so learn your interactions. And you got some of them like Royal Giant practicing social distancing like it's still 2020. Elixir Golem has 3 stages, and the first one is heavy like his giant brothers, so you can't pull that. The second and third one are light enough to allow a King Tower activation, and usually those are the ones that connect to the tower, so that can be very useful in actual games. And due to their higher quantity, they work with other tower troops as well. Oh, and Golemites kinda act the same way as Golemites. Wall breakers are kinda like just a nice pull with a challenging timing, but there is an easier variation that is less risky and more forgiving if you miss. Sadly, Cannoneer and Duchess would kill them fast, so it's not possible to activate with those. Unless something is tanking for them, I wouldn't even bother trying. For Evo, it's slightly harder and the 2 wall breakers are bigger and kinda push each other around. It's still possible to pull off, but the timing changes based on the tower troops you're using. Mainly cause there is a small runner that has a different size, so Cannoneer exposing him quick would change some timings. I personally found the Princess Tower to be the hardest one to do, but all of them can be done with 0 damage. Demolisher, despite being ranged, can get you a King Tower activation when he goes melee mode. It's kinda like wall breakers as it functions the same as them, so that makes sense. But the timing on Duchess and Cannoneer can change the outcome. As you can see here, he got stuck for a bit and died early. So mainly you just want to play the nado a bit earlier when using these towers, so the Demolisher can walk closer to the king. Mother Witch can also activate the King Tower, but only when you force her to summon a cursed hog on your side. It even works consistently with Cannoneer because the Mother Witch takes some hits instead of the cursed hog. Dagger Duchess is where it kinda starts demanding more precise timing and angles, but at the end of the day, despite not having a generous timing, it's still possible. Magic Archer having Pierce makes it possible to activate if you use a smaller troop with a nado. Cannoneer and Duchess kill him quick, so the timing on these 2 is slightly harder to get right. Just make sure you play the Ice Spirit before he crosses the bridge, then nado him fast into it with the right angle. Bowler kinda functions the same here, but the Spirit needs to be placed a bit deeper. The reason is because he is heavier and has lower range, so you need him to walk a bit by himself for it to work. But he has a ton more HP, making it the same for all 3 tower troops, so you don't have to learn different timings. Executioner can be done like Magic Archer and Bowler if you want it, but you can get away with just a nado if you pull him here with the right angle. Although it's much less damage if you do the Spirit method, so only do the nado one if you can afford it. This trick also works on Firecracker. I'm only putting it in for the video. It's obviously better to use troops and not nado. Surprisingly, this also works if you're using Dagger Duchess, which really shocked me. Cannoneer makes it impossible with his 1 tap though. Ewiz has an interesting activation that's only possible because of his double target attack mechanism. His low HP makes it hard to do with Cannoneer and Dagger Duchess. When it comes to Cannoneer, you would be fine as long as he isn't in the range of the second Cannoneer. But when it comes to Dagger Duchess, the timing is usually very tight and hard to hit. You basically want to make sure the tornado pull is very early so he doesn't waste time walking and immediately starts attacking. Little Prince is technically a ranged troop, but the Guardian can activate the King Tower. It works the exact same with Duchess, but Cannoneer is slightly different. If the ability was played before he crossed the bridge, the Cannoneer would be able to kill it before it activates the King Tower. If the ability was placed slightly later somewhere mid-bridge, then there is a small window where you can pull that off before she dies, but the timing makes it mostly not worth going for. Now this Ice Spirit technique is something you will see frequently in this segment of the video. The main trick to perfect this is to place it late enough so that the mini tank moves more to the left than diagonally. In the case of the knight, if you're using Cannoneer, it wouldn't work as he will die pretty much right before he hits the king. But Evo Knight can survive long enough for that to happen. Healer is kinda exactly like the knight when it comes to king activation mechanism, but because she has less HP, the activation with Dagger Duchess is kind of inconsistent. I say inconsistent because there is a small window where it's possible, but it's kinda hard to pull off. And obviously if Duchess was too much damage for the healer, the Cannoneer is an overkill. Rascals are up next, and the Rascal Boy is exactly the same as the knight and healer, although This dude is more tanky than the knight. It literally worked even with Cannoneer. I'm honestly surprised because I've played this game for 8 years yet somehow never noticed how tanky this dude is. If you notice here with the Mighty Miner, my tornado position is a bit more, I guess you can say, different. The reason is with these mini tanks, the Ice Spirit timing and position matters much more than the Nado one. So like one tile to the left on the Nado doesn't break the interaction, but any change to the Ice Spirit would. Like here, if you see a single change to the Ice Spirit position ruined the whole activation and got your tower damaged. But if we go back to the original Spirit position, the alternate Nado position worked out without any issue here. And here is a Skeleton King activation to further show that this still works with the old Nado position. You also don't have to worry about the tower troops you are using because Skeleton King works on all of them. Golden Knight is interesting because on his own like this, you can treat him like any other mini tank. However, with his ability, things change a bit as you can't kite him with the spirit like you used to do. You could place the spirit far away as his ability will place him on an angle closer to the king, making it possible to activate. It's even possible to place the spirit more far to have him not dash on the tower and get a king tower activation with no damage. Oh, and before I forget, without the dash you can activate with all the tower troops without any issue. It's just there's more tight timing with the Cannoneer, so watch out from that. When I first tried the Monk, I was under the impression that he would be like the rest of the champions and the activation worked on every tower troop. I almost called it a day and went with that. But then when I tried to do it without an Ice Spirit, to my surprise it worked without an issue. I was able to pull it off even with Cannoneer, so I guess the Monk is the least heavy mini tank champion. The Prince brothers use the Ice Spirit tech, but the timing is different because they are fast. Dark Prince would kinda just work normally here, activating King with 0 damage on your tower, and his fast speed makes it possible to do with Cannoneer despite his low HP. Normal Prince has his lance, so his attack range is extended, which changes everything. It's not possible to freeze and pull him, so you have to take one regular hit after pulling him with the spirit. And he has more HP than Dark Prince, so it's also possible to do with all 3 crown towers. The last mini tank with a similar activation is Night Witch, and it's honestly impressive if you look at how it works. It may look very hard, but I somehow pulled it off 3 times in a row first try, although I'll have to say it's harder with Dagger Duchess. Cannoneer here is the easiest one because he chokes on those 2 bats very hard, giving the death bat more window to bite the king. Okay, sorry, I lied. Giant Skeleton also requires the same Ice Spirit Nado tech to activate King with him. But in my defense, it's a very terrible idea to do that with him because the death damage will get on your tower as well. Besides that, the Giant Skeleton homies always have that secret military weapon on them to use when you least expect. Goblin Machine is one of the few tanks that don't need an Ice Spirit to activate King, and it's because of his rocket. You can even damage him a bit before pulling him so you don't take much damage on your towers. Besides needing to make sure your tower is in his rocket blind spot, the Nado positions and timings are very generous and easy to pull off. Valkyrie somehow works without the Ice Spirit thing, mainly because of her attack radius is big enough to hit both towers. Sure, if you use the Ice Spirit tech thing, you would take much less damage on your tower than just the Nado. But sometimes you might only have 3 elixir, and pulling her in range of your second tower while getting a King Tower activation is better than nothing. Evo Valk is hands down arguably the easiest King Tower activation in the entire game. You will take a tiny bit of damage if you only use Tornado, and obviously the stronger your tower is, the less damage you take. But you can get really creative. As long as she is few tiles closer to the king than usual, her Nado attack will get on King Tower and damage him. Mini P.E.K.K.A is very small and you can pull him very easily without taking tower hits like Hog Rider. The main issue is he's too small, he dies to the Cannoneer before activating the King Tower. Lumberjack is similar to the Mini P.E.K.K.A when it comes to weight, so it's all good here. It's even better because his death rage makes it unnecessary for him to actually reach the king for the activation. So regardless of what tower you're running, since he will die near the king, he will damage him with the rage bottle. Royal Ghost is also like them, so it's possible to get him on king while taking 0 damage, and because he is invisible, whatever tower troop you're running doesn't change the interaction, although he seems bugged and gets visible without doing any damage, so don't try that with a non-full HP ghost as it might die. A king activation with bandit is possible possible if you're fine taking a dash and a normal hit in exchange for it. With Cannoneer, 2 shots and the nado kills it, so it's not possible to get it. But with Duchess, the dash soaks a ton of daggers, making it possible to get a kinked activation with it. Fisherman is one of the more difficult ones, but it's possible to get it with just the nado alone because he isn't that heavy. Although his HP is too low, it's only doable with the Princess Tower. Goblin Brawler can activate the king, which makes me wonder why graveyard decks use him when they literally die to king tower activations. Other tower troops kill him quick enough, but I still find it very weird regardless. He was in graveyard decks before tower troops were added to the game, but whatever. Mega Knight kinda has a similar process to the Golden Knight with ability, as you pull him after kiting. Basically any troop and a well-timed nado would get him on your king tower. And the timings here aren't really that tight, so it's not hard to apply that to a real game at all. Phoenix's death damage works kinda like the Valkyrie's main attack, as it has a decent splash range, but the other towers take it out too quick. You can't do it unless you have a Princess Tower. Baby Dragon has low range and splash, so I thought something like this would work. I really wanted to get it to work, as it would be a very cool king activation, but it sadly doesn't. He needs to be closer to the king tower for his splash radius to start in a close enough tile to hit the king tower, but as long as he's placed in the middle, this trick should work on all tower troops. So if you're playing splash yard, always have your baby dragon deployed on the corner and not behind the king tower. Minions are one of the few swarms that can activate the king tower. Using Cannoneer will still allows you to activate king with them, as that tower is slow, but Dagger Duchess takes them out very quick. You would need something to waste some daggers if you want to activate with them. You can also easily activate your king tower with guards. They have more HP than minions, so it's possible to do using Dagger Duchess, and the shields allows it to be possible using Cannoneer. Goblins are a phenomenal activation that you can do while taking minimal damage. Corner spawn like this doesn't prevent the king tower activation, and even a middle spawn, which is the most optimal position for goblins, doesn't prevent a king tower activation either. I actually don't understand why I don't see more players going for this king activation. Duchess is the only tower that doesn't allow a king activation with goblins. Goblin Gang, which only has 3 goblins, can still work, but the timing is more sensitive. Even corner deploy and middle deploy allows for an activation. The only problem is that the already difficult timing becomes harder with those. With Cannoneer, you can't activate because the Goblin Gang has only 3 goblins, and the second tower kills the 3rd goblin before he gets a hit in. And since Duchess killed 4, she wouldn't work with just 3. Barbs can have more than 1 formation based on how you split them, and a 2 split doesn't work with the Princess Tower. A 3 split group does work because the 3rd barbarian pushes the second one closer to the king tower, and a full barb deployment works fine for the same exact reason. With Cannoneer, things kinda changed because none of the formations work. The 3 split formation gets all messed up because the second barbarian dying nudges the 3rd barbarian away, and the full barb deployment doesn't work because of the order and the speed your Cannoneer kills the barbarians with. Dagger Duchess ruins the 2 barb one because it kills them too quick to get a hit on the king tower, and the 3 barb formation doesn't work for the same reason as the Cannoneer. But the 5 barb formation works because she is slower at killing barbs, so it allows the barbarians to push each other closer to the king tower. Evo barbs have pretty much the same interaction, except the 2 Evo barbs on Duchess becomes possible to activate because of the extra HP they get. E-barbs are much easier to deal with, as you can just pull one of them to the king tower without any problems. And with Duchess, you can just get the activation a tiny bit before the E-barbs die. But because Cannoneer deals a crap ton of damage, it makes it not possible to get the king tower activation with that. For royal recruits, when split evenly, try to look for a recruit that gets nudged closer to the king tower. When split in a 4-2 formation, you should go for the 2 side and get them closer to the king with an ice spirit, then pull them. The same positions and timings work for the rest of the tower troops with no issues. Forget the true blue, true red stuff, just look for which recruit is getting pushed closer to the king and pull that. And even Revo recruits work the same way, except for some different timings with the ice spirit. Recruits are actually the last unit in this video, and honestly I did not expect that many king tower activations. Despite how hard this video is to make, it kinda made me realize that I can include king tower activations in the new card sneak peek nutshell videos, so I'm kinda glad I made this video, my dudes.